The hearing will come to order. Secretary, I hope you had a good lunch and maybe a walk out in that beautiful sunshine. What a great day it is out there. But you probably ran downtown and worked for 2 hours.
Well, I'm not used to this Washington, D.C. weather compared to the other Washington.
Oh, I'll bet, yeah.
How many umbrellas do you own?
Actually, I don't like umbrellas either, so they're always breaking and afraid that they're going to poke people in the eye or in the head, so I just wear a parka over my suit coat in Seattle.
Oh, that's great. Mr. Secretary, there were some questions with regard to census. We're just going to ask you a few. If you'd like to give us any more detail about the status of how you see the census at this point, and give us some assurances with regard to timelines. If there's anything you can add to your testimony that you've already given with regard to the census, is extremely important. You come to this job after and assume the responsibilities of an agency that just did an absolutely miserable job with the census up to this time, from contractor oversight to the performance of those who were in charge of this process, and I think they would really acknowledge that, and actually did acknowledge that sitting right there at that table. So what was not done well and not done right in a previous regime, you have to assume the product and to make it right. So if you would talk to us about the status of it, how you see going forward, give us some assurance that you're meeting every timeline, and we're going to be ready to do a bang-up job on the census. It's going to make everybody proud. We'd appreciate it.
Thank you again, Chairman Mollahan and Ranking Member Wolf. Regarding the census, there have been numerous changes that have been made, numerous procedures that have been instituted. Let me just be very brief about it and answer any further questions you might have. But there have been leadership changes as a result of the debacle surrounding the handheld computers, where a large funds of money were actually given out to the contractor for very little performance. We've adjusted the field data automation contract so that we're doing more items in-house, and we also have a different contractor on some of the systems. We have implemented, in response to the GAO report, a high-risk improvement plan to address the points raised by the GAO report. There are, for instance, monthly status reports to the Department of Commerce Secretary's Office as well as OMB, and then within the Department of Census or the Census Bureau, they have weekly reports, and they have almost like a situation room where they're monitoring all the key items and key management functions and issues and timeframes and projects within the decennial census. We have already received some reports that, for instance, the verification of addresses is proceeding on time, actually a little bit ahead of schedule and within budget. Because the Census Bureau has abandoned the handheld computers for the enumeration that were to be used by people going around door to door, they've instead reinstituted a paper and pencil program, and as a result, they've not been able to fully test all of their systems. They were hoping for a full dress rehearsal this past year, but that has not occurred, and so they're testing various systems in an abbreviated fashion, in a scaled-down version, and of course the timeframes for responding to any deficiencies that might be identified in those field tests are very, very the time schedule or the response time is very small and very narrow. But so far things are proceeding on course with no major problems identified, so we're basically keeping our fingers crossed. But we have an enormous challenge ahead of hiring over at least another 1 million people next spring to serve as enumerators, to go door to door and to get the response that we need for those who are not sending in the questionnaires back to the Census Bureau. But so far we are watching it very, very carefully, and in fact we will be bringing on almost a SWAT team of people to really look at to get an independent assessment of exactly the status of the Census Bureau operations surrounding the decennial census. And we're bringing people from outside, private sector, people experienced in census, and to have a thorough independent review just to make sure that things are on track.
Mm-hmm. Would you submit for the record a timeline, your targets for accomplishing each stage of the census, and then obviously the implementation date, so we can just get a sense of what you have to do between now and implementation and how close you are to meeting the time schedule?
Yes, be happy to submit that.
When will the Bureau thread test the paper-based operations control system?
I'm sorry, what was that?
When will if you know, and if you don't, you submit for the record, will the Bureau thread test the paper-based operations control system?
We'll have to get that to you.
How are the handhelds working?
The handhelds are actually working for the limited purpose now of helping verify addresses and entering into the GPS system so that we actually have a very more accurate determination as to in which legislative district or where a particular household will fall or a particular address will fall. So actually that is proceeding well, and I think we've had demonstration projects for members of the Congress and some of the staff. I've actually had that shown to me as well, and the handhelds even incorporate such things as the time entry for the field workers so that we can accurately record their hours for payroll purposes. And they can actually communicate back to the field offices if they have any questions. So I've talked to one of the staff members one of the paid individuals who's conducting this, and they like it, and it's getting positive reviews out in the field.
We have a number of fairly detailed questions with regard to the census that we're going to submit, Mr. Secretary, for the record.
Okay.
So that you can respond to them for the record. Department security-wide issues, Mr. Secretary. The Inspector General reports that the Department has reported information security as a material weakness every year since 2001, despite additional expenditures to mitigate the problem. Securing systems from cyber threats is the most difficult piece of the challenge. Incorporation of wireless and other technologies to support operations and workplace flexibilities invite new risks to the Department, which you must anticipate and mitigate. The IG has found a number of problems and several notable security incidents. This includes security personnel with an inadequate grasp on the Department's IT security policy, NIST standards, and guidance in security technology. The Department has apparently cited a lack of resources as a major impediment. And besides the fact of what you've requested for those resources, will you commit to providing this committee with a clear, focused request for IT security funding that lays out the requirements and the results expected, and give us your assessment of this problem?
Be happy to supply that in writing as well. And I just want to indicate that I've met with the Inspector General at the Department of Commerce. We've gone over these issues about information security and for instance, the budget request for the department or the Bureau of Industry Standards recognizes the need for that overhaul. In my earlier comments this morning when I talked about some of the systems, servers and other pieces of equipment for which there are no replacement parts, I was referring to the Bureau of Industry Standards, and there I would like to find a way in which we could accelerate the replacement of the information technology there. And when Representative or Congressman Culberson was asking about trying to achieve savings within the Department of Commerce, it's my hope that if we are able to find savings in other departments or agencies or bureaus within the Department of Commerce, that we'll be able to move that into the areas that most need it, whether it's in satellite for NOAA or into the technology needs and cybersecurity needs within the Department of Commerce, without having to wait for future years and to wait for future appropriations or funds in order to accomplish that.
Well, we stand ready to work with you on that, Mr. Secretary, and I know you'll let us know what your resource needs are as you deal with that issue. The American Recovery and Reinvestment Act provided in our title of the bill, $4.7 billion for broadband, and I believe 2.4 perhaps in agriculture, but something like that. As we talked previously, West Virginia, unfortunately, is overrepresenting the rural areas of the nation, possibly with regard to inadequate or no broadband access. As the department fashions its guidelines with regard to the expenditure of these funds, what steps are you taking to ensure that individual states with particular inadequacies in this area are not overlooked as these funds are expended, and that they achieve one of the goals, and that is to bring broadband access to those areas where it's inadequate or doesn't exist?
That is one of the objectives of the broadband dollars that have been appropriated or provided under the Recovery Act, and it's a clear priority for the President to make sure that both rural and urban areas served, underserved, and not served are addressed. We're working very closely with the Department of Agriculture and the FCC in trying to formulate policies, general policies and criteria that would be used across the country, and to make sure that when all is said and done, that we can actually point to significant achievement of specific policies and goals and objectives for the deployment of these broadband dollars. We've been very, very transparent in seeking the input, ideas from all sectors, members of the Congress, to other federal agencies, to the governors, to the mayors, the private sector, academia. And so we're hoping to put together those general principles by which we would give out these grants, and hope to have those principles clearly enunciated and published by early summer, and hope that the first grants will flow in the early fall of 2009. But trying to develop some policies and principles that will target the rural areas is a priority for us.
Mr. Secretary, I had a broadband symposium or meeting, if you will, at which the West Virginia Secretary of Agriculture, a very capable woman by the name of Kelly Goes, attended and was a panel member. I was impressed by her knowledge of the communications in West Virginia, the needs in West Virginia, and specifically because we were talking about broadband. I did get the sense, however, that she was waiting. She was waiting for something to come down from the federal government. And that unnerved me a little bit, because I would have hoped that there would be more interaction between the state and the federal government, even at this point. For example, she didn't know whether she was going to be issued a check and said, do broadband in West Virginia, which she said, I hope that doesn't happen, in words or effects, she said. Or whether she was going to be asked to come up with some comprehensive plan, or whether the federal government was going to work with the states and then work with nonprofits or work with different sectors. So she's really at a loss. And so how, now, with the federal government going forward with its rulemaking or whatever procedure is going to come forth with these guidelines, at least based upon my sense of listening to her and observing her at this hearing, I didn't have a sense that the state was really prepared to be really proactive when the right time came. Didn't know where they were going. So it means they're going to have a learning curve after all this comes forward. And you may not be able to comment on this, but what interaction is going on with the states? The states are going to be huge players in this. I guess you're going to work through the states. Is that your sense of it? Well, primarily, or are you going to work through the states and individual entities throughout the country?
Mr. Chairman, I can't give you a definitive answer because no decisions have yet been made, and there are a whole host of recommendations and ideas on how to distribute the $4.7 billion within Commerce, and as you say, over $2 billion in the Department of Agriculture. We're coordinating with the FCC and the Department of Agriculture. The Department of Commerce has deployed a very transparent process in seeking input and ideas, and everything is on the internet so that everyone in the world can see the ideas and the suggestions offered by the telecommunications companies and different sectors within telecommunications, and they all have different ideas, to the cable companies, to the governors, to the mayors, and all the different interest groups.
No, I understood your testimony. That's what you said before. I guess I'm simply trying to anticipate or trying to head off a disappointment in this area. There's a lot of money. There's a lot of need out there. There's a lot of not having access, a lot of gaps out there. And if at the end of the day we have not really strategically developed a plan, and just looking at West Virginia, that makes a difference, that's going to be a very sad thing, and an opportunity, a real opportunity missed. This is a lot more, as I don't have to tell you. You're from, you know how to do it up there, and you know how important this is for economic development, and also, most importantly, for areas that are naturally resource dependent, for economic diversification. It is the infrastructure we need to do that, and I am intent on, to the extent possible, following this with the hope that the federal agencies and good people who have responsibility for fashioning these rules and the state of West Virginia are strategic and results-oriented with regard to its being implemented in West Virginia. And
I share your concern, Mr. Chairman, because for us, the measure of success is not simply distributing the dollars in a timely fashion, but really making sure that at the end of the day that significant policy objectives have been advanced so that we can truly say that for the dollars expended, the American public, businesses in urban, rural areas, underserved, unserved areas have truly benefited from this distribution of dollars. We have to be very, very strategic in how we deploy these dollars to make sure that we're getting true bang for the buck and that we're leveraging whatever successes we have already achieved.
Yeah, it's terribly complicated, I know. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Mr. Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome back, Mr. Secretary. Series of different subjects, but on the census, before we left, there was one more I wanted to ask. The Census Bureau is partnering with thousands of national and local organizations to promote participation in the 2010 census. I personally have serious concerns that you're partnering with a group like ACORN. I think they've been convicted of crimes, and I think it's a very bad group. And so I'd like to get your comments about that, and are there other groups on there of a similar nature?
Mr. Wolf, or Congressman Wolf, with respect to ACORN, let me first indicate how the Census Bureau is approaching partnerships with other organizations. At no time will Department of Commerce or Census Bureau be contracting out with any organization to carry out any functions of the Census Bureau. In terms of partnerships, we will not be providing grants to nonprofit groups to do outreach or coordination or anything like that. We invite all partnership groups or partners in the community to help us spread the word. And we will, for instance, use our printed material and distribute to them for them to pass out. But we are in no way subcontracting out the hiring of people, personnel, to go door to door. We insist on full authority to hire the people that we think are qualified. Now, if organizations want to encourage their members and others in the community to come and apply for a job with the Census Bureau to knock on the doors, that's fine. But we will do the screening, we will do the testing, and we are not bound by their suggestions. And so we are not using them as subcontractors to to provide people into us, nor are we subcontracting work out to them.
But why would he even participate with a group like Acorn?
Well, first of all, Acorn...
I mean, they fabricated lists. They did. I mean, you're in the Census Bureau. Quite frankly, anything that Acorn is connected with, the American people are going to have a difficult time believing it's credible. And so why would you even involve yourself in something, a group like this has had such a bad reputation? I mean, it just questions. I mean, why? I mean, are they so
if Acorn is willing to take our brochures and pass it out to families in their communities and hold meetings and pass out brochures encouraging people to mail in the response when they get it in the mail, then that's the type of help that's legitimate, that's legal, that we would support.
Well, that's a troubling answer, because would you do it with a convicted felon, a group of people that have been convicted felons? Would you do it with a group that wanted to overthrow the United States? Would you do it with a group that has a history of abusing women? Let's say there was a group that had a history of abusing women, and you just want to participate, and they say, well, we'll participate with you, but, we'll take your paper. Would you do that?
No, we would not.
Would you do that?
No, we would not, sir.
Well, then I ask you to go back and give us a written report and take a look at some of the things that Acorn have been involved in. I mean, that question really raises questions then about the ability to do this census right. If you have a group like Acorn, then it's going to be flawed. It's going to be questioned. People are going to have problems with it.
Be more than willing to talk with you about this issue.
Well, thank you. Several years ago, as chairman of this subcommittee, I included language requiring that the ITA employee receive training on human rights, the rule of law, and corporate responsibility. Unfortunately, it is my understanding that this training has not been continued after that year. I guess that's what happens when you leave the committee. And that the new ITA employees have not, I said, this program has not been continued. This training, I said, but perhaps that, parenthetically, that's what happens when you leave.
Perhaps we can look at
the committee. Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Given that the department's commercial service currently has 120 offices in China, far more than any other country, it's a missed opportunity to better prepare our officers to be aware of abuses and advocate for human rights. We've also been told by the staff that you actually have a carryover in the IT. There's the question, would you start retraining it now? Would you look at having people in your commercial program, both with regard to China and Vietnam and any other countries that you think may be appropriate, to have some training and understanding, perhaps have a afternoon where you bring in Harry Wu, who was in prison for 18 years, bring in Rebecca Deer, bring in a Protestant pastor, bring in the Cardinal Kung Foundation, so that your commercial people can hear from people who have direct knowledge of this. But one, will you start the program up, and would you consider starting up with a carrier of excess money that you currently have?
Well, you mentioned this program to me just before this afternoon hearing commenced, and I was not aware of this program.
No, I didn't expect it.
No, I understand that. No. But I'd like to look into it and find out more about it, and I can report back to you our response in terms of providing some sort of training or reinstituting this training program.
Yeah, I think it would be good. I mean, why wouldn't we do it?
Right.
I mean, why wouldn't we want to sensitize? I mean, here we actually had a situation that I picked socks up off the line in Beijing Prison No. 1. Those socks were being manufactured for export to the West. I mean, here you had Tiananmen Square demonstrators making socks so people could buy them here in the West. And it would seem to me that your people ought to know what's going on, both also in Vietnam. I mean, I think they're persecuting the Catholic Church. They're persecuting Buddhists. They're having a very, very difficult time. So I really can't understand why, and again, it's not your fault, why we would not do that. As Commerce Secretary, what are you going to do to ensure that our export control laws are aggressively enforced in order to prevent dual-use technologies for leaving the United States and going to develop advanced military equipment in China, build a nuclear bomb in Iran, or assist terrorists in creating a weapon of mass destruction?
Dual-use export falls under the jurisdiction of the Bureau of Industry Standard, and the National Academy of Sciences has come out with a series of recommendations on how to improve that operation. There are certain items that obviously that many people feel should not be the subject of regulation that would then free up resources to really focus on true and other materials that are the subject of national security concern, and so that we have the right emphasis and can be more vigilant in particular areas. And I very much am willing to look at that and to see what we can do to reform the process, to really put our personnel and focusing on those issues, items that clearly have that are of concern to our national security interest. But we need to be very, very careful with the technology that we have and the equipment and products made in the United States, that they not fall into the wrong hands or used for military purposes, especially where it could be adverse to the United States interests. And so we take those responsibilities seriously. But that's also an area, for instance, where our technology, information technology, is vulnerable and antiquated. It's in that very same agency within Department of Commerce that has complained that it has information technology for which there are no replacement parts, and obviously in order to be cyber secure, much of the information is no longer, they've completely shut off access to the internet just to make sure that their systems are secure. Those are the types of programs that we need to really watch very, very carefully, and that where we need to find, if we're able to free up dollars in other operations, redeploy them, and to address some of these cybersecurity issues.
How long has that been a problem with regard to that bureau?
I think it's been ongoing for many, many years, and I received a report from the Inspector General saying, and even from the acting director at BIS, complaining about this and expressing concern. It's been going on for perhaps 8 years, and they've been wanting more dollars devoted to beefing up their information systems and addressing the issue of cybersecurity especially in an area and a bureau that deals with such sensitive issues, such as military technology.
Well, I agree. Last question I have, are you aware of the JASON program? Do you know Dr. Ballard?
No.
I thought you would have known Dr. Ballard.
No.
I would encourage you to look into the JASON program. The committee has funded the JASON program over the years. Dr. Ballard is the scientist who just discovered the Titanic, and he has an educational program with regard to the oceans, and it's fairly exciting. A lot of our schools out in Northern Virginia participate in the JASON program. I had the opportunity. They asked me to come one night to introduce Dr. Ballard, and I had another event to go to, and then I said, by the way, it's the last game of the World Series, so I really don't think we're going to get a crowd, but I'll come. And the auditorium was packed, and they were there listening to Dr. Ballard talk about the oceans and the science, and so it's an educational program in a lot of schools. I would urge you to sort of, one, try to find out a little bit about it, and maybe as Dr. Ballard comes into town, sit down with him. I believe he has a place up in Woods Hole up in Massachusetts. But it's a program of sciences with regard to the oceans and teaching young people math, science, physics, chemistry, and biology. And for some year, we will put the program in, and then when the budget comes up from what was in the budget last year? Administration budget? No. Excuse me? Yeah, we had to add it in, and every time the administration would testify, they would say it's a great program. We think it is a good program. But then when the budget would come up, it would not be in. And sometimes, and I know you won't do this, sometimes the administration plays games. They know there are programs that the Congress will probably put in. They want those programs, but they won't put it in knowing that somebody up there on Capitol Hill may very well put in. Now, to really care about the math and science and physics and chemistry and biology and oceans and scientists and young people in education, the JASON program offers a lot. So I hope you take a look at that, and if you're interested, we'll let Dr. Ballard know the next time he's in town to come by to see you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Wolf. Mr. Rupersberger.
Okay. Two issues I want to get into. That's the satellite issue and also the issue of cybersecurity. On the satellite, we in this country have been having a difficult time in the last maybe 10 years of maintaining our efficiency and where we were years ago in the space industry. I think when Sputnik came about by the Russians, we responded as a country by putting a man on the moon in 12 years. We have a difficult time in our overhead architecture to even get a major satellite up in 12 years, and there are a lot of reasons for that. You basically don't have a lot of jurisdiction, but your jurisdiction in NOAA, where you work with NASA, is important, and so you have some responsibility there. I'm chairman of the Technical Tactical Committee on Intelligence, which oversees the whole overhead architecture. We had a huge investigation, or really hearings and tabletops, bringing the entire industry in, both the Director of National Intelligence, the Department of Defense, and also the major contractors, commercial contractors. One of the things that came out of that report was that one of the reasons we've been having problem, a lot of it is in acquisition and setting the specifications, getting people with an expertise in the area of acquisition. But another reason was the fact that a lot of the research that needed to be done to put up the satellites, was the research and development were being done after the contracts were let out. And I think that in order to maintain our dominance from a national security point of view, but also what our satellite programs do in the commercial sector, what they do for NOAA, we need to maintain and keep moving ahead in that regard. So my question to you is basically, do you understand that there are issues in the satellite industry and the space industry? From your perspective, where would your priorities be as far as resource? And one other thing that if you could address, we can't afford to build satellites for Department of Defense, Intel, and NASA and think we haven't the money to do everything. Now, we're going to keep doing all of them, but we need to really work more in a collaborative mode with DoD, with Intel, and especially in sharing some of the classified areas that we really don't need to be classified with NOAA and with NASA. So if you can respond to that issue, I'd appreciate where you think you're going from your perspective. And if it's too complicated, just get back to me afterwards on this issue so I can work with your staff, because I also want to get back, and this is a very high priority for me, is ITAR. And I want to make sure that we work together to resolve this ITAR. We can't wait any longer for ITAR. We're having serious issues involving our national security, but our business and whatever. So I think we really have to work on that too.
Thank you very much, Congressman, and I would like to perhaps sit down with you privately and individually to learn more about some of these issues. I can only say that that I believe that the satellite programs for NOAA suffer from a tri-agency management structure that simply does not work. And the fact is that with respect to the contracting, as you said, a lot of the research and development is performed after the contracts have been signed because the contracts are really for entities, organizations, whether private sector, to develop the instruments once the scientists have figured out what it is that they want collected and what type of information they want collected 20 or 30 years from now. None of those instruments exist now. And so we're basically saying, as President Kennedy challenged the nation to put a man on the moon by the end of the decade, we're basically asking the scientific community and the contracting community to come up with these instruments to measure and to do various tasks for which there are no things, they're not off the shelf that you can then just stick onto a satellite and put them up into space. So the contract calls for the research and development of items in a very general and broad sense for which people really don't have a firm estimate of the cost or how long it's going to take to do. And so the cost overruns occur when it takes more time to do it than anyone ever envisioned. It's taking longer, it's more complex, and as a result, budgets either skyrocket or the number of instruments gets scaled back, or both. But also, I think there's an issue as to how we supervise the subcontractors and whether that's done effectively and efficiently. And in some cases, we've found that perhaps it's better to have NASA actually being the overseer of the project as opposed to a private contractor overseeing a subcontractor. So I think we need to re-examine all these different models, find out what really works and what doesn't work, because it's amazing that it's taking us so long to get these satellites up and running.
There's another area, too. It's the commercial satellite, which, because Europe has not had the money that we've had, they very effectively have used commercial satellites, which usually you can get maybe a lot more satellites for the money. They're on time and on budget, or they don't get paid. And that's something that I think we all need to look at in that regard, too. There's a report that our committee rendered that the President has now, or the administration has now, and I should get my staff person to get it to you all and look at it. I think one of the things, though, about research and development, even before a contract is let out, we need to do that before it goes out. In other words, have the research and development there. You have program management issues. You have people are putting together the acquisition, don't have experience. So there are a lot of arenas and issues that we have to deal with there. Is very important. The other is cyber. Cyber is probably one of the most important issues from a national security point of view that we're going to deal with in the future. We're way behind the 8 ball, other than some areas that I can't discuss. But basically, cyber can affect everything that we do in this country. We know that we've had, and I can say this is not classified, it's been out there. Our Pentagon has been cyber attacked. NASA's been cyber attacked. And when we get cyber attacked, there's probably millions, if not billions, of dollars of research and development that say, a China or Russia or somebody can obtain that information that we've done, and they can pick up what we need to do. But it goes way beyond that. We rely. We're probably we are the strongest country in the world, and one of the main reasons we control the skies. Yet China and Russia are that close to us, and yet from a cyber point of view, these attacks can come through a grid system, a grid system as far as energy or electricity or whatever can be done. They can go and they can attack a bank. You and from some of the experts in this area, basically, if you have a senior citizen in South Dakota who has a server and deals with a community bank, and that community bank deals with Bank of America, the bad guys can go in through that one server and probably affect an ATM system of Bank of America generally. When Russia went in to fight Georgia just this last summer, they cyber attacked first, from a banking, a grid. So this is a very serious issue that we really have to move quickly. The good news is that President Obama understands this. He was briefed with McCain and President Bush in the last year where this really came to the forefront, and he has agreed to put money in the right place. He has Melissa Hathaway, who he's working with on his side, and then General Alexander, who's probably one of the best technicians that we have in the United States military. And so they're good people that are in place. But it's just not about the people. A lot of people right now think that NSA, they listen to their phone calls, which is not true at all. It's unfortunately sometimes the way the media takes something, moves something out. This is as far as what people think. But cyber, we do not own the Internet. The United States does not own the Internet. So it's very relevant, very important that I think from your perspective in a commercial, that Microsoft, all these businesses that are global, are dealing with the cyber issue. And there's got to be a buy-in from the business community, from the government community, and from the average American citizen who has a computer, that we need to do this. So if you could really focus on the cyber initiative and maybe stand up some people in your organization, because a lot of this is going to have to do with global companies. And we need to have all of them in the tent, because the government can't, there's going to be billions of dollars worth of money, and the government cannot pay for all of that. So business has to be a part of this.
I thoroughly agree, and as you indicated, Ms. Hathaway is helping conduct that review on behalf of the President, and I believe that various executive agencies will be meeting shortly to discuss that report, if not, and to have that report issued.
Do you see, from your perspective and your mission, that you have a role there also? I think you have a major role.
Oh, very much so. Very much so, and the whole issue of the impact on commerce, the impact to businesses, small and medium-sized businesses, to our financial institutions, as you indicated, to our power grid system on which everything depends. Our country really needs to, and as the President has declared, we all need to really step up to the issue of cybersecurity, not only within our agencies, but for the entire country as a whole. And commercial enterprises, financial enterprises, power grid systems, water supply systems, medical systems, everything. I mean, it's very easy for a person, a teenager from some other country, just to start hacking into and destroying.
It could be Al-Qaeda, it could be a hacker, it could be other countries.
Or an organization of terrorist intent.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Rupersberger. Secretary Locke, as former governor of Washington, you're very familiar with the Pacific Coast Salmon Recovery Fund. In fact, the state of Washington receives, I believe, approximately 17% of those funds for this program. Last year, we heard testimony from the previous NOAA administrator, fine administrator, retired Vice Admiral Conrad Lautenbacher, testified that the PCSRF had been funded to the tune of, quote, many millions of dollars, end of quote, over the previous 6 or 7 years, and in his opinion, quote, it is time to start weaning the states off of some of these grants. They've had time to adjust to them and the time to build recovery plans. Do you agree with that statement in whole or in part? And if not, why not? And
I'm not familiar with his comments or his recommendations or his assessment. I do know that a lot of effort has gone into addressing the endangered and threatened salmon runs on the West Coast and the North Pacific, all the way from Alaska down to Northern California, and we constantly face additional challenges. In fact, there appears to be another run of salmon that are threatened, and which the governors of both California and Oregon are asking for economic assistance because it appears that the scientists are recommending a complete shutdown of a fishery in the Klamath Basin area, and that will have profound economic impact. It's important that we set time frames, that we have measurable goals with respect to the actions by which we can judge the actions at the local level. We cannot just continue to support endless study after study. There has to be action plans. We need to be monitoring the local governments and the communities with respect to their progress on those action plans. And if they're not making progress, they need to adjust those action plans. So I think it really is a case-by-case basis. I do believe, however, that as we look at endangered runs in the North Atlantic to the Gulf Coast states, that is, I think, one of the other congressmen indicated earlier that we need to be very mindful of the economic impact to the restrictions that we impose based on the science. We have to be grounded by the science, but then we also need to recognize the economic toll and the economic impact of restricting fisheries.
well, let me explain a little bit more the focus of my question. This Pacific Coast Salmon Recovery Fund is requested in previous years to the tune of about $35 million in the request, the 08 request. The 09 request was $35 million. There is considerable support, parochial support in the Congress for this program, and programmatically we've increased it to 60, 70, 80, 90. Last year, I think after conference, this fund was, we funded it to the tune of $90 million. That's a lot of money. That money, as I understand it, goes for remediation of spawning areas, helping the salmon get up to where they spawn. And the program's been going on, as Admiral Lautenbacher indicated, for a long time now, a great number of years, and been many millions of dollars spent on it. And I think it's worth a review because it is so much money. This committee really does want to address the problem and the issue, and I'm just wondering if, repairing so many culverts or opening, so many dams or, so many runarounds, how much of that we can do, because I don't see the goals being achieved. I see there's still being continuing problem. There's some that say, look, you can remediate, continue to do that if that's your strategy, but you have to be equally or maybe more concerned about the increasing acidification of the oceans where the salmon swim. And so I just encourage you to look at that program, and I also wonder about the equity of these areas being so designated and salmon being the only species involved here. I just commend it to your consideration as you come forward, and because we're looking at, because it is so much money. Again, there's a tremendous support for it in the Congress. We understand its justification, but we think we ought to be more strategic and maybe more scientific about it. Are we really addressing the problem by spending these tremendous amounts of money on inland remediation?
I thoroughly agree with you, and there's always room for analysis and evaluation of the effectiveness of programs. The measure of a program should not be the dollars spent, but what we're getting for it.
I want to go to someplace else. The Economic Development Administration, Mr. Secretary, it is a agency that I'm pretty familiar with. As I understand it, well, just tell me what your attitude is with regard to the Economic Development Administration. To what extent do you anticipate the Department of Commerce supporting it, and what is going to be your emphasis with regard to programs that they manage?
Well, I think that the role of the Economic Development Administration is more critical now than ever before, given the tough economic times that our country is in. The President has proposed in the 2010 budget delineating out of the funds that have been proposed some $50 million for the creation of regional innovation clusters that really would build on the strengths and the vision of communities. And that's up to each community working with their public-private partnerships, their colleges, universities, and really focusing on their strengths and trying to build on those strengths. Another $50 million would be designated for public-private business incubators to encourage that entrepreneurial activity, especially in economically distressed areas. And then, of course, the Congress put some $150 million in additional funds for Economic Development Administration as part of the Recovery Act, especially for communities experiencing very severe job losses. So we're very excited about that. And, of course, with some of the money that was provided, several hundreds of millions of dollars provided in the aftermath of various natural disasters in the recent couple of years, again, to target those areas to help them address with and mitigate against those natural disasters, but also to help rebuild some of their industries. So I look forward to the opportunity to administer this. It's right now administered through regional offices on a competitive basis all across the country, and they do incredible leveraging of dollars. I think for every $1 that's provided by the federal agency, we're actually getting some $14 in economic benefit, working in partnership with local economic development associations, colleges, universities, state programs, state dollars, the private sector, and the federal dollars provide sometimes that last critical piece of funding that makes the project viable. So this program is very, very valuable and very much needed.
Yeah. I would encourage you to, as you interact with the Economic Development Administration and its new leadership, encourage it to have a economic diversification focus, because really in those areas that are dependent on traditional industries, if they are not going to be focusing on diversification, they need to be incentivized to focus on diversification, because they're going to be a tough competition if they're just going to continue to try to pursue those sectors of the economy of which they relied forever. And the Economic Development Administration, I think that's a simple redirection, perhaps only in part. But if that were part of the grant of made a part of the grant of every grant that was submitted, to what extent does this contribute to economic diversification? You would, in my judgment, help facilitate the long-term improvement in the standard of living that we're looking for. Please talk to me a little bit about regional innovation clusters and public-private business incubators. Are there models for these two suggestions out there across the country, and otherwise talk a little bit more about them for us?
Actually, there's been a great deal of interest in the academic community and the business development community about, first of all, public-private business incubators. We see a lot of those supported by the states, using the colleges and universities where private sector can rent very inexpensive space in a college engineering facility and have access to other staff and laboratories where they can actually help perfect their ideas, their innovations, their products, and take advantage of the expertise that's also available, offered, let's say, in that public-private partnership to really help entrepreneurs perfect their ideas and to make it more commercially available.
Do you have any examples of where that's occurring? Or for the record, could you submit?
Well, actually, there's some at the University of Washington in my home state of Washington, and I believe that there are numerous examples. But we can, yes, get you a list of some of that. And Jonathan Sallet, who used to work at Commerce Department, has written extensively on this and even, I think, testified in front of various committees here in the House of Representatives about the notion and the benefits of regional clusters as well as business incubators. The whole notion of the regional clusters is to build on the natural strengths of a community instead of just giving out dollars willy-nilly and for any project that comes along, but to really try and capitalize on the aspirations, the natural, geographic, workforce strengths of a region, some of their core industries to begin with, not at the expense of diversifying, as you've rightly pointed out. But if an area is well known for biotechnology, what is that entire region doing to bring other businesses into biotechnology or biomedical research? And are the grants, are they working truly in partnership with the colleges and universities to train people into life sciences at all levels of salary and employment?
That would be relatively easy to do if the area has a tradition of biotechnology. You bring those clusters. I could see where that could happen easily.
But it might be in other areas. Another area might be focusing on tourism. Another area of the country might be focusing on aerospace or automotive industry, whether it's in the South or you name it. And it's not to prejudge, but to say, have you as a region really thought about what you believe to be your economic future or a component of your economic future? And do you have a lot of forces that are already aligned that perhaps with some federal assistance incentivize and promote even greater collaboration for whatever it is that the community and the regional economic leaders have focused on?
Yeah, and all regions have some strengths.
Yes.
But if you are going to diversify, then sometimes you have to help create the strength and then create the cluster. But how would the Economic Development Administration promote a regional innovation cluster? What would be the steps that the facilitating steps that and resources made available by the Economic Development Administration?
It would be grants along the lines of our current programs where we receive applications. We would judge the applications based on the type of partnerships that are being envisioned and looking at the totality of support. Obviously, if there's private sector funds, it means that there is private sector interest and validation on the ideas and the priorities or the emphases put on by the, let's say, by the local government, the state government, or the region. But knowing that not every region has, in fact, is prepared to have identified what they want to be or do over the next several years, then there's funding also proposed just for planning and to bring all those economic development, the counties, the cities, the state economic development people, the nonprofit, the colleges, universities, and the private sector together so they can start creating that vision for their communities.
Are these block grants? Are these grants applied for directly to the Economic Development Administration
These would be grants that would be applied to directly to economic development.
and managed at the regional basis, at the regional level?
It would be, I believe that our intent to have them administered and the decisions made at the regional levels by the regional offices scattered throughout the country.
Mr. Secretary, as a wholly fee-supported agency, USPTO's funding is not based on the requirements necessary to complete the work, and the agency's ability to operate is affected by the economic crisis. Fewer applications are filed and more patent holders decline to maintain their patents. Would you agree that the decision to transform USPTO into a wholly fee-supported agency does not appear to be working?
Well, I think that clearly there are challenges with that fee-supported concept, and especially with applications declining and the backlog increasing. We may have to look at another model, but clearly, number one, we should not be diverting the fees generated within the Patent and Trademark Office to other purposes. They need steady funding. They may need, in fact, an extra infusion of funds down the road to reduce that backlog and to make significant changes, improvements in technology, so that we can truly get the average processing time of patents down to what I think is an acceptable level. The average now is anywhere from 27 to 28 months for the first action review. That's an average, because some patents are very simple and take very little time, and so that means other patents that are more complex can take anywhere from 4 to 5 years. And I think that's completely unacceptable, especially for a country that prides itself in innovation and the need to get these products, new ideas, new medicines out to market and commercialized.
And what is your goal?
My goal, I'd love it if we could say that the average time frame was actually less than a year.
And you think that's achievable?
Well, we're hopefully about to announce a new director for patent and trademark. We want to work with all the stakeholders, including the employees, the professionals there, on creative ways and using technology, and basically start from scratch and rebuild and reinvent how we process patent applications.
On April the 2nd, the Wall Street Journal, we're winding down here, Mr. Secretary, the Wall Street Journal reported that 11% of local TV stations plan to change their broadcast areas. Is it possible that even with a converter box and a powerful rooftop antenna, that some people may still not receive their local TV stations?
Well, we're working very hard on that, Mr. Chairman, and I'm proud to say that the backlog of requests for coupons has been eliminated, and all requests for coupons are being processed within a week. And I note that in the various large media markets, I think about the top 100 media markets, roughly at least 95, 97% of the households are ready and will not be affected by the changeover come June 12th. But there are some pockets around the country that where we'd like to have the numbers higher in terms of the households ready to receive this new digital transmission. And so we're really revamping and stepping up our advertising, working with the FCC to get the word out. Too many seniors and others simply don't know what an analog versus a digital television is. And the commercials that say that, the countdown has begun does not really tell them whether they're affected and what to do. And so we need to modify our announcements, our publicity campaign, working with the TV stations who are doing a lot of public service announcements. It's in their economic interest to make sure that people can receive their broadcast. And so we're trying to get the word out. But we have made considerable progress, and I think the country is much better prepared than it was several months ago. And I thank the members of the Congress and the President for the delay and the extra funding to get the publicity out and to provide those converter coupons. But in some of the markets where they have made the change, they have noticed that in the past with analog, your reception may not be great, because of distance or because of geography, but you were getting a signal. The problem with digital is that there's a very abrupt, it's basically all or nothing, and so there is no gray area of a, maybe a less than desirable, less than high quality picture. Some individuals may end up with no picture. And so there have been some complaints about that, for instance, in the Denver area, which made the transition about 3 weeks ago. But very few, very few. And so that's something that the FCC and we are looking at and working with the stations to address.
Well, we wish you luck in that. As the complaint center of last resort, I can tell you members of Congress hope you resolve these issues before they get to us. Mr. Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One final issue. The Patent and Trademark Office is one of the premier agencies in the government with regard to using telework. The committee over the years has had language in encouraging, mandating telework. Can you tell us your views with regard to telework?
I think it's a great idea. It's one of the successes, the great successes, and is a great example for other federal agencies. So much of the work actually done in the trademark area is done by telecommuting or telework. And I actually would like to take the success in the trademark division and move it over to the patent area as well, and in fact to other agencies, especially as we face, people face congestion. It helps cut down on congestion, pollution, reduces the overhead costs of government not having to have offices for everyone. And so I think it's an innovative way in which the private sector is moving, and we in government should also try to follow that same model.
Also in continuity of government, should there be that need, would you submit for the record how the various agencies of the Department of Commerce are doing, NOAA, EDA, et cetera? What percentage each agency has with regard to how many are teleworking?
Yes, we try to get you that information.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Secretary, thank you very much for your appearance today. Again, congratulations on your appointment to this very important position at this very crucial time in our nation's history. This committee stands ready to work with you in solving the challenges and confronting the challenges the diverse challenges that your agency deals with. We look forward to the budget in detail. We will probably have questions, the committee and members of the committee. After it is submitted, we'll hold the record open for a couple weeks after that for that purpose. And do you have any comments in summary or in closing that you would like to make?
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for the time and the courtesy of engaging in this dialogue. And clearly, we need to work with you and the members of your committee on these tough issues, whether it's cybersecurity, whether it's economic development, math and science instruction, human rights issues in other countries, and to just elevating science and technology, not just in the programs administered by the Department of Commerce, but also within the entire federal government. The charge of the Department of Commerce is very, very broad, and we're trying to make it even more relevant to the people of America, the medium and small-sized businesses, the Main Street businesses of America. And we have much to offer those entities, large and small. And we need to make sure that people know that the Department of Commerce is truly one of a repository of knowledge, a source for innovation, and ultimately a source for job creation. And that's what it's all about. So I thank you and look forward to the opportunity to work with you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Hearing is adjourned.